Arthur had never once disobeyed his father. Not when he built the company from nothing. Not when he handed Arthur the CEO chair. And not when he handed him a list of 847 names to eliminate before the quarterly report. That was Monday. By Friday, the new PR director had made him question everything he thought he knew about leadership and himself. Arthur Grayson woke up at exactly 5 o'clock. No alarm. No hesitation. His eyes opened as if triggered by an internal switch, precise and unyielding. The room was silent, sterile, everything in its designated place, untouched by chaos. The city outside Seattle was still asleep, wrapped in fog and distant lights, but Arthur was already moving. Routine was not a habit. It was control. By 5:12, he was in the kitchen. Black coffee. No sugar. No variation. The machine hummed softly, the only sound permitted in the morning. He didn't scroll his phone. Didn't check messages. The world could wait. Discipline came first. 5:30 shower. Exactly 8 minutes. Not 9. Not 7. The water temperature never changed. 5:45 wardrobe. White shirt, pressed the night before. Dark suit, tailored, flawless. Tie, aligned with mathematical precision. Every movement was efficient, calculated, stripped of unnecessary motion. No personal items. No photographs. No reminders of anything outside the system. Arthur Grayson did not waste time. By 6:10, he was already reviewing overnight reports on his tablet. Market fluctuations. Risk assessments. Numbers behaved. Numbers obeyed logic. Numbers never lied. But numbers lacked pulse. For months, Arthur had been running parallel simulations in the quiet hours of 4 o'clock, ones that didn't aim for profit, but for survival. He kept them encrypted, a ghost in his own machine. But the Project Zero notification from his father sat pinned at the top of his screen, a variable that refused to align. At 6:40, his driver opened the car door without a word. Arthur stepped in, his eyes fixed on the city passing by. The pedestrians, the early commuters, the fragments of unpredictable human motion. For the first time, he didn't see them as noise. He saw them as the system his father was preparing to dismantle. The tower rose above everything else. Glass, steel, and reflection, a monument to control. 50 floors of curated order. His domain. Inside, everything aligned with his expectations. Employees moved with purpose. Conversations were short, professional, contained. No laughter too loud. No distractions. The atmosphere wasn't cold, it was optimized. Arthur stepped into the elevator. Floor 50. Private access. As the doors closed, his reflection stared back at him. Perfect posture. Neutral expression. No cracks. No hesitation. The office was exactly as he left it the night before. Minimalist. Clean lines. No personal items. No photographs. No reminders of anything outside the system. He sat down, placed the tablet on the desk, and began working before the chair fully settled beneath him. Emails. Decisions. Approvals. Rejections. Everything moved through him like a filter, efficient, detached, necessary. At 7:55, a high-priority alert bypassed his filters. Private, executive only. Arthur opened it. One line, minimal, precise. Project Zero. Final directive. Elijah. No context was needed. The system he had spent a decade perfecting was being weaponized against its own foundation. At 8 o'clock sharp, his assistant entered. No small talk. There never was. Across the city, in the same building but on a lower floor, Jules stood in front of the glass entrance for 3 seconds longer than necessary. Not out of fear, out of awareness. She looked up at the tower, at the endless rows of windows reflecting a pale morning sky. It felt less like a workplace and more like a machine. Good, she thought. Machines can be fixed. She stepped inside. The contrast hit immediately. Silence. Structure. Eyes that didn't linger. People moved like components, efficient, precise, disconnected. Jules adjusted her bag on her shoulder and kept walking. She didn't match the environment. Not entirely. There was something uncontained about her, an energy that didn't flatten itself to fit corporate geometry. At reception, she introduced herself. Jules Carter, new PR lead. The receptionist nodded, already typing. No curiosity, no welcome, just process. Of course, Jules expected that. The company didn't hire her because they liked her. They hired her because they had a problem. An environmental scandal. Leaked reports. Public backlash. a brand reputation collapsing under the weight of its own silence. And now they needed a voice. Her voice. She stepped into the elevator, this time surrounded by others. No one spoke. No one looked at each other. The air felt controlled, filtered, like even conversation required authorization. Jules exhaled slowly. This is going to be fun. The briefing room on the 50th floor was already half full when she arrived. Executives, analysts, legal advisors, all arranged neatly around a long table that looked more like a command center than a place for discussion. And at the head of it, Arthur Grayson. She recognized him instantly. Not from photos. From presence. He didn't dominate the room loudly. He didn't need to. Everything around him adjusted automatically, like gravity had a center and he was it. He didn't look at her when she entered. He was speaking. We focus on containment. Limit exposure. Control narrative flow through verified channels only. His voice was calm. Even. Clinical. No emotion. Just structure. Jules took a seat without interrupting. She listened. He continued, outlining a strategy built entirely on control, press limitations, restricted statements, data framing. It was efficient, technically flawless, and completely disconnected from reality. From people. Jules felt it immediately. Not wrong. Just incomplete in a way that could destroy them long term. Arthur finished speaking. Silence followed. Not the thoughtful kind. The obedient kind. Then his eyes finally moved. They landed on her. Measured. Assessing. You're the new hire, he said. Not a question. Yes, Jules replied. Jules Carter. A brief pause. You've reviewed the situation? I have. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. And Jules leaned forward just enough to shift the room's balance. And for the first time since she entered, something changed. Not in the room. In him. A fraction. Barely visible. But real. And Arthur repeated. The word didn't carry volume, but it carried weight. It pressed into the room, flattening any instinct to soften what came next. Jules didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it settle, let every pair of eyes register that she had been singled out, measured, placed under direct expectation. Then she leaned forward slightly, not enough to challenge the structure of the room, but enough to shift its center of gravity. It works, she said calmly. Technically. A faint shift moved along the table. Not visible in faces, visible in stillness. People adjusted without moving, bracing without showing it. Arthur's gaze didn't flicker. That's not an answer. It's the beginning of one, Jules replied. A micropause. Not hesitation, precision. Your plan contains the data leak, limits exposure, and stabilizes short-term metrics. It's efficient, clean, predictable. She tilted her head just slightly. And it will fail. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. Someone inhaled sharply. Too quietly to be called out. Too loud to go unnoticed. Arthur didn't react. Not externally. But the rhythm of the room changed again. Explain, he said. Jules clasped her hands loosely on the table, grounding the point before delivering it. You're treating this like a system error, she said. It's not. It's a trust collapse. And those don't respond to containment. They respond to perception. Perception is unstable, Arthur replied immediately. So is trust, Jules shot back. A pause. Then she continued, voice steady, controlled, but carrying an edge that didn't belong in that room. Right now, the public doesn't believe anything this company says. Not because they lack information, because they don't trust the source. You can restrict statements, filter messaging, control exposure. None of that matters if every word sounds engineered. Arthur's fingers pressed lightly against the table surface. Still, measured. And your solution is to what? Stop sounding engineered, Jules said. A few people shifted now. That one was too direct to ignore. Arthur's gaze sharpened, not in anger, in focus. Be specific. Full acknowledgement within 48 hours, Jules said. No diluted language. No legal buffering that turns sentences into empty shapes. You state what happened, what failed, and what changes now. That exposes liability. The legal director cut in again, unable to stay silent this time. Jules turned her head just enough to acknowledge him, but didn't give him control of the conversation. You're already exposed, she said. The only variable left is whether you look honest or defensive while it unfolds. She turned back to Arthur. That choice affects everything that comes after. Silence followed. Not passive, not obedient. Active. Watching. Calculating. Arthur leaned back slightly, creating a new angle. Not retreat, recalibration. You're prioritizing emotional response over structural defense, he said. No, Jules replied. I'm aligning structural defense with human response. Another shift. Subtle, but present. Arthur stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. Movement, in that room, meant conclusion. But he didn't dismiss her. Not yet. He walked along the table, stopping a few steps away from her. Not looming. Not closing distance. Just repositioning the axis of the conversation. Let's test your assumption, he said. Jules didn't move. If we follow your approach, Arthur continued, we trigger immediate market instability. Stock drops. Investor pressure increases. Legal risk escalates. Internal panic spreads. His voice remained even. Each consequence placed carefully, like data points in a model. What offsets that? Jules stood up now. Not reactive, intentional. Time, she said. Arthur's expression didn't change. That's not a metric, he replied. It is when trust is the variable, Jules said. You stabilize faster if people believe you're fixing the problem, not hiding it. Arthur's eyes narrowed just slightly. Belief is not measurable. It is, Jules said. Just not in the way you prefer. Another pause. Longer now. The room had stopped existing for everyone else. Even the people still physically present felt irrelevant. Background noise. Arthur studied her, not her argument, not her words. Her consistency. She wasn't improvising. She wasn't performing. She was anchored. That made her dangerous. Your model assumes cooperation from external actors, he said. Media, public, stakeholders. No, Jules replied. It assumes resistance. A fraction of a second passed. Then she stepped closer, just one step. Enough to remove the invisible distance he had set. You don't win trust by controlling people, she said quietly. You win it by giving them something real enough to argue with. That landed deeper than anything before. Not because it was louder, because it wasn't. Arthur held her gaze. For the first time, there was something there that didn't belong to calculation alone. Interest. Not agreement. Not acceptance. But engagement. He turned away first. Not to end the conversation, to change its frame. Everyone out, he said. The command was immediate. No hesitation. No questions. Chairs moved. Papers gathered. The room cleared faster than it had filled. Within seconds, it was just them. The silence that followed was different. Not structured. Not controlled. Open. Arthur walked to the head of the table again, but didn't sit. He placed both hands lightly against the surface, looking down for a moment, not avoiding her, aligning thought with decision. Then he looked up. You challenged a finalized strategy, he said. Yes, Jules answered. In your first hour. Yes. A beat. Most people here don't do that in their first year. I'm not most people, Jules said. No arrogance. Just fact. Arthur almost reacted to that. Almost. Instead, he shifted slightly, recalculating something internal. Your analysis isn't wrong, he said. Jules didn't move. Didn't acknowledge it outwardly. But it's incomplete. There it was. Correction. Structure restored. Then define the missing variables, she said. Arthur's gaze locked onto hers again. You have 1 week, he said. Build a strategy that integrates your approach without increasing legal or financial exposure beyond acceptable thresholds. Jules tilted her head slightly. Define acceptable. Arthur took a step closer now. Not aggressive. Exact. Convince me, he said. The distance between them wasn't accidental anymore. It was intentional. A test. Jules held it. Didn't step back. Done, she said. A pause. Not empty. Charged. Arthur nodded once. Good. He turned, walking toward the glass wall overlooking the city. The conversation, structurally, was over. But something had shifted. Not in the plan. Not in the crisis. In the pattern. Arthur Grayson didn't allow disruption without control. Didn't tolerate variables that refused alignment. Didn't invest time in uncertainty. And yet, he had just given one a deadline instead of eliminating it. Behind him, Jules exhaled slowly. Not relief. Focus. 1 week. Not to prove she was right. To prove that his world, and hers, could exist in the same equation. And somewhere between numbers and people, something had already started moving. The jet landed without announcement. No press. No schedule entry. No internal memo. It didn't need one. By the time the wheels touched the runway, the system already knew. Arthur was informed exactly 4 minutes later. Your father has arrived, his assistant said, standing at the threshold of his office, voice neutral, posture controlled. Arthur didn't look up immediately. He finished reading the line on his screen, closed the document, and only then raised his eyes. When? Now. A beat. Where? Penthouse suite. Private access. Of course. Arthur nodded once. Reschedule my next 2 meetings. No reaction. No visible shift. But the rhythm of his day, precisely constructed, perfectly contained, had just been altered by a single variable he could never fully control. The restaurant didn't exist on any public listing. Top floor. Private elevator. No staff beyond those personally vetted. Glass walls overlooking the city, but even the view felt curated, like the skyline itself had been arranged to serve the man sitting at the center table. Elijah Grayson didn't stand when Arthur entered. He didn't need to. Power, in his world, didn't perform. It waited. Arthur, Elijah said, as if the name itself carried ownership. Father. Arthur took his seat across from him. Distance measured. Exact. For a moment, neither spoke. Not silence, evaluation. Elijah studied him the way one reviews an asset, condition, performance, deviation. You look tired, Elijah said finally. I'm not, Arthur replied. Of course not. A faint smile. Not warm. Not amused. Controlled. A server appeared, poured wine, disappeared. No interruption registered as human. You've had complications, Elijah continued, swirling the glass slightly. Arthur didn't touch his. The situation is contained. Contained, Elijah repeated. Yes, I read your report. A pause. And the one you didn't send. Arthur's gaze didn't shift. Elijah leaned back slightly, satisfied with the microscopic reaction he had extracted. You've always been thorough, he said. Even as a child. The word hung there. Not nostalgic. Not affectionate. Diagnostic. Arthur's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. Then released. Why are you here? Direct. No detours. Elijah's smile sharpened. Not wider, sharper. Efficiency. Good. You learned something. He placed the glass down. I'm here because the company is underperforming. It's stabilizing, Arthur corrected. It's vulnerable, Elijah replied. A beat. And vulnerability, he added, is expensive. Arthur leaned forward slightly. I have a strategy in place. Yes, Elijah said. You do. Another pause. Then, it's insufficient. There it was. Not criticism. Not opinion. Verdict. Arthur didn't react immediately. He let the statement settle, measured it, dissected it internally before responding. Define sufficient, he said. Elijah's eyes lit, not with emotion, with recognition. There it was. The version of Arthur he had built. Liquidity, Elijah said. Efficiency. Market confidence. He leaned forward now, mirroring Arthur's earlier movement, but with a different weight behind it. Exit readiness. Arthur's gaze sharpened. You're planning a sale. Planning. Elijah repeated softly. No. Structuring. A pause. Timing is everything. Arthur's fingers pressed lightly against the table. Still controlled. Still measured. At what cost? Elijah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it on the table between them. He didn't slide it forward. He didn't need to. Arthur opened it. Pages. Numbers. Projections. And one line that reframed everything. Project Zero. Arthur read it once. Then again. 20% workforce reduction. Full automation of key operational sectors. Short-term cost collapse. Stock search projection. Acquisition window, 12 months. Arthur closed the folder. Carefully. Precisely. No, he said. Elijah didn't blink. That wasn't a request, he replied. A pause. It's a directive. Arthur's gaze locked onto his father's. I'm not dismantling the company to inflate a quarterly graph. You're optimizing it, Elijah said calmly. At the expense of 20% of the people who built it. At the benefit of the 70% who remain, Elijah countered instantly. Arthur didn't move. You don't believe that, he said. Elijah's expression didn't change. Belief wasn't part of his system. People are resources, Elijah said. Allocated. Reallocated. Removed. The words were clean. Polished. Empty. Arthur leaned back slowly. For a moment, the version of him that existed in the boardroom, the controlled, precise, untouchable CEO, aligned perfectly with the man across from him. Then something shifted. Small. Internal. You built this company, Arthur said. I did. And you're willing to strip it for parts. I'm willing to evolve it. Another pause. Longer now. You're still thinking like an operator, Elijah added. That's your limitation. Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly. And you're thinking like someone who already left, he replied. That landed. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But it registered. Elijah tilted his head just a fraction. You're not the owner, Arthur, he said quietly. The words didn't rise. They didn't need to. You're the manager, he continued. An effective one. Replaceable, if necessary. There it was. Not said in anger. Not as a threat. As fact. Arthur held his gaze. Didn't react. Didn't deflect. But something inside him tightened. Not emotionally, structurally. A pressure point. Eliminate 20%, Elijah said. Stabilize projections. Increase valuation. We sell at peak. And then? Arthur asked. Elijah smiled faintly. Then it's no longer our problem. Silence followed. Heavy. Defined. Arthur looked down at the folder again. Project Zero. Clean. Efficient. Devastating. And suddenly, Jules' voice echoed. Uninvited, precise. They're not variables. They're the system. Arthur closed the folder again. Slower this time. More deliberate. I'll review it, he said. Elijah leaned back, satisfied. Not with agreement, but with movement. That's all I require, he said. A pause. Then, almost casually, I hear you've hired someone new. Arthur's gaze lifted. PR, Elijah continued. Jules Carter. The name didn't echo in the room. It didn't need to. Elijah watched him carefully now. Not as a father. As a strategist. She's vocal, he added. Arthur didn't respond immediately. Temporary, he said finally. Elijah smiled. Not because he believed it. Because he didn't. Be careful, he said softly. Uncontrolled variables tend to create instability. Arthur stood up. Conversation over. But not resolved. Instability, he said, is sometimes necessary. Elijah's eyes followed him. Measuring. Recalculating. For the first time in a long time. The system wasn't perfectly predictable. The directive came without discussion. Not from Elijah. From the system Arthur still controlled. We need a field assessment, Arthur said the next morning, standing at the head of the smaller strategy room. No board. No observers. Just execution. Jules didn't sit this time. She stood across from him, a tablet in her hands, already scanning the data he had forwarded minutes earlier. Logistics hub, she said. Primary distribution artery. Arthur nodded. It's where the failure originated. Or where it became visible, Jules corrected. A brief pause. He didn't challenge it. Either way, he said, we go there. We. Yes. The word didn't leave space for interpretation. Jules watched him for a second longer than necessary, not questioning the decision, evaluating it. Field visibility isn't your standard move, she said. Neither is a trust collapse, Arthur replied. That ended it. The drive took them out of the city faster than expected. Glass towers gave way to industrial lines. Clean geometry replaced by functional complexity. Steel, cranes, containers, systems that didn't pretend to be elegant, only effective. Arthur worked in silence beside her, reviewing operational logs, cross-referencing incident reports. Jules didn't interrupt. She watched. Not to screen him. There was no hesitation in his process. No wasted motion. Every decision followed a chain. Every conclusion had a base. But there was something else. Distance. Not from the work. From everything outside it. You've never been here, have you? She asked. Arthur didn't look up. I have. When? Before I became CEO. That answer closed more than it opened. Jules let it sit. The port was loud in a way the office never allowed. Engines. Metal. Movement. Voices that didn't lower themselves to fit corporate tone. Arthur stepped out of the car and, for a fraction of a second, paused. Not hesitation. Adjustment. Then he removed his jacket. The motion was simple. Practical. But it changed something. Jules noticed. Of course she did. Didn't expect that, she said as they walked toward the main operations area. It's inefficient to ruin a suit, Arthur replied. But his sleeves were already rolled. The issue revealed itself quickly. A malfunction in automated sorting, containers misrouted, flagged inconsistently, delays cascading through the system. On paper, it was a technical failure. On site, it was something else. Frustration. Pressure. People compensating for a system that wasn't holding. Arthur didn't announce himself. Didn't gather attention. He stepped directly into the problem. "Stop the line," he said to the nearest supervisor. The man hesitated, just for a second, until he recognized who he was speaking to. Then he moved. The machinery slowed, then halted. Silence didn't follow, just a different kind of noise. Arthur crouched near the control panel, already tracing the fault line with his eyes. "Manual override is looping," he said. "You patched the system instead of resetting it." "We didn't have clearance for a full reset," the supervisor replied. "You do now?" Arthur reached in, hands precise, movements exact. No wasted effort. No uncertainty. Jules watched. This wasn't the man from the glass office. This was something else. Not softer. Not warmer. Just real. "Full reset triggers a delay across all outbound routes," the supervisor said. "Short-term delay," Arthur replied. "Prevents long-term collapse." A beat. "Do it." The system powered down. For a moment, everything held its breath. Then restarted. Clean. Stable. The flow resumed, slower at first, then aligning. Arthur stood up, wiping his hands with a cloth someone handed him. "Monitor for 30 minutes, he said. "If the loop reappears, escalate directly." "Yes, sir." No hesitation this time. They stepped away from the noise, toward the edge of the dock where the water stretched out in controlled chaos. Jules leaned against the railing. "You could have just sent instructions," she said. Arthur looked out at the containers moving again, now in sequence. "Instructions don't account for human adjustment under pressure," he said. Jules studied him. "That's interesting," she said. He glanced at her. "Why?" "Because yesterday, people were variables," she replied. A pause. "Today, they're a factor you plan around." Arthur didn't answer immediately. The wind moved between them, carrying the distant noise of machinery and voices. "Variables evolve," he said finally. Jules almost smiled. "Almost. That's one way to admit you were wrong." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." A beat passed. Not tension. Not conflict. Something quieter. More precise. Jules straightened slightly, shifting back to the reason they were there. "This changes the narrative," she said. Arthur's attention returned to her fully. "How?" "You weren't hiding the problem," she said. "You were fixing it. That's not what the public sees." "No," Jules agreed. "But it's what we can show them." Arthur considered that. Not dismissing. Integrating. "Controlled exposure," he said. "Honest exposure," she corrected. A brief pause. Then, "Both," Arthur said. That was new. Jules caught it immediately. "Now we're talking." They walked back through the port together, but the distance between them had changed. Not physically. Structurally. The first layer of opposition had shifted, not gone, not resolved, just reconfigured. Arthur stopped once more before they reached the car, looking back at the system in motion. Efficient. Functional. Dependent. On people. He didn't say it out loud, but the equation had already started to adjust. The city was already dark when they returned. Not the quiet darkness of early morning, but the layered kind, full of reflections, movement, unresolved noise. Arthur didn't go home. He didn't suggest it. He didn't need to. "Conference room or your office?" Jules asked as the elevator climbed. "My office," he said. A beat. Less interruption. That was true. It wasn't the only reason. 450 was nearly empty. The precision of daytime had dissolved into something looser, quieter. Lights dimmed. Voices gone. Systems still running, but without the human rhythm layered on top. Arthur's office looked the same as always. Perfect. Untouched. Controlled. Jules stepped inside and stopped for half a second. "No photos," she said. "Not relevant," Arthur replied, already setting his tablet down. "No personality," she added. "Also not relevant." Jules didn't argue. She placed her bag on the floor, pulled out her laptop, and moved to the low table instead of the desk. Arthur noticed. Didn't comment. He removed his jacket again, slower this time, and set it over the chair. Sleeves still rolled from the port. That detail stayed. Work began without transition. Data on one screen. Messaging drafts on another. Financial projections layered against communication timelines. Jules built narrative structures. Arthur dismantled weak points. Back and forth. No wasted words. No repeated arguments. Every exchange moved forward. "This line sounds defensive," Jules said, eyes on her screen. "It reduces liability," Arthur replied. "It increases suspicion." A pause. "Adjust it," he said. She did. Minutes passed. Then hours. At some point, Time stopped being tracked and started being absorbed. They worked in a silence that wasn't empty, but waited. My father doesn't believe in variables he can't code, Arthur said, his voice dropping. He believes emotions are noise. He trained me to remove them. Discipline, correction, failure to maintain control had consequences. Removal of privileges, of access, of acknowledgement. Jules didn't soften the silence. She stayed there, in the cold reality of his admission, until the rhythm of the city outside seemed to sync with the quiet tension in the room. Jules understood that immediately. What kind of consequences? She asked. Arthur looked at her then, directly, fully, and for a fraction of a second. The system dropped. Removal, he said. A pause. Of privileges. Of access. Of acknowledgement. The last word didn't fit the pattern. It lingered. Jules felt it. Didn't comment on it. Didn't soften it. Just stayed there with him. The air shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Arthur looked away first this time. Not to end the moment. To contain it. We should continue, he said. Professional. Controlled. Jules didn't move immediately. Then, yeah, she said. But neither of them stood up right away. The distance between them wasn't defined by conflict anymore. It wasn't resolved either. It was something else. Unstable. Real. Eventually, they moved back to the table. Back to screens. Back to structure. But the rhythm had changed. Subtly. Permanently. Their exchanges were still precise. Still efficient. But now, there was context behind them. Meaning layered under the words. At 2:17, Jules paused mid-sentence. Arthur looked up. What? He asked. She didn't answer immediately. Just looked at him. Then, nothing, she said. A beat. Just, this works. Arthur held her gaze. Not misunderstanding. Not overanalyzing. Just accepting the statement as it was. Yes, he said. Quiet. Simple. And for a moment, that was enough. The day of the board meeting arrived not as a climax, but as a calculation. Arthur stood at the threshold of the 50th floor, his reflection in the glass a mask of perfect, cold resolve. Elijah was already inside, his presence a gravitational pull that shifted the room's air. Finality. Arthur, Elijah said, not looking up from his tablet. Project Zero is the only logical outcome. Arthur didn't flinch. He signaled Jules. The heavy doors opened, and for the first time, the board saw not a subordinate, but a strategist. Logic, Arthur countered, requires all variables. You've ignored the most critical one. Arthur isolated facts, identified inconsistencies, weighed the risk of every potential action. Elijah waited. Predatory. Calculating. Patient. Arthur finally exhaled, retrieving a folder labeled Employee Protection, Confidential. He placed it on the table deliberately. The paperweight clicked against the edge, a subtle punctuation in the silence. This, he said, voice deliberate, heavy with unspoken responsibility, is the real plan. Not my father's. Not the board's. What I believe will minimize harm while preserving stability. Jules leaned forward, scanning each spreadsheet, memo, and contingency. The office contracted around them. Nothing existed outside the tension of strategy, morality, and the human element. You kept this hidden, she observed softly, absorbing the depth of the gamble. Not because of mistrust, but because revelation would destroy it before it could protect anyone. I've had this framework for months, Arthur added, his eyes meeting hers. But a shield is useless without someone who knows how to position it. I was waiting for a variable I couldn't predict. I was waiting for you. I had no choice, Arthur said. If my father discovered this preemptively, every measure I've implemented to safeguard staff could be stripped, reversed, weaponized. Timing is everything. Secrecy is survival. Jules processed the words. Trust strained, yet the revelation clarified everything. He hadn't betrayed her, hadn't acted against her. He had been forced to operate in the shadows, balancing ethics, loyalty, and the constraints imposed by his father. A long pause. Ice thickened, but cracks emerged. Jules looked up, eyes sharp. So we moved forward, together. Arthur nodded once. Not surrender. Not concession. Recognition. Acknowledgement. Alliance formed under duress, a partnership forged between professional necessity and personal understanding. Outside, the city thrummed, oblivious. Inside, allegiances shifted. Trust was tested, walls fractured, and the first threads of rebellion against a controlling father and a rigid system intertwined into a strategy that could change everything. The ice was still there, dense, formidable, but it had fissures now, thin lines of potential, subtle, dangerous, and fragile. And through them, the possibility of true collaboration, real understanding, began to seep. Arthur, Elijah began, calm, precise. Today we finalize what must be done. His gaze flicked briefly to Jules, a small spark of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of her role in this confrontation. Project Zero. Efficiency, control, profit, all inevitable. Arthur didn't respond immediately. His hand rested on the folder labeled Employee Protection. Confidential, the weight of the paper grounding him, the decisions within representing not just strategy, but morality. Jules spoke first, voice steady but charged with urgency. I've prepared a counter-presentation. Real projections, long-term sustainability. Preserving staff doesn't mean sacrificing profit. It means safeguarding institutional knowledge, loyalty, and human capital. Elijah's eyebrow raised, a subtle expression betraying more than he intended. Arthur followed, his voice measured, calm, authoritative. The data she presents is accurate. It demonstrates a sustainable path that doesn't compromise immediate operational goals, but mitigates risk of talent loss and reputational damage. The board members murmured, a ripple of unease threading through their collective confidence. Elijah's calculated composure flickered for the briefest moment as slides and charts illuminated the room, contrasting the cold numerical efficiency of his plan with the nuanced, human-centered approach Jules and Arthur advocated. Do you understand what you risk? Elijah's tone sharpened, the steel beneath his words cutting through the tension. 20% of staff. Millions in operational costs saved immediately. A straightforward path to maximizing shareholder value. You jeopardize all of that with sentimentality. Elijah leaned forward, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. I can have the security team escort you both out before you finish your next slide. I built this board. They answer to me, not to your idealistic projections. He looked at the chairman, a silent command for him to shut the presentation down. Sentimentality is a luxury, Elijah, Jules countered, her voice cutting through his like a blade. What we're presenting is cold-blooded evolution. If you can't see the difference between a weakness and a strategic pivot, perhaps the system has finally outpaced its architect. Arthur leaned slightly forward, eyes unwavering. Risk is not minimized by numbers alone. Ignoring the human factor creates instability, turnover, low morale, operational disruptions that compound exponentially. The plan we present accounts for all variables, including human responses. Data supports it, and experience confirms it. Jules stepped closer to the projector, highlighting slides, charts, and projections with precision. This isn't theory. We've modeled operational outcomes, market reactions, and staff retention scenarios. We are not opposing efficiency. We are redefining it with human insight integrated into decision-making. Profit is preserved, risk is mitigated, and loyalty strengthened. A tense silence fell. The board's initial murmurs subsided as eyes shifted between slides and the two presenters. Elijah's jaw tightened imperceptibly, the imperious control he wielded subtly undermined by the logic, clarity, and courage of his son and the young strategist before him. You leave me no choice, Elijah said finally, the words measured, a warning wrapped in civility. Either you acquiesce, or you stand against me. His gaze locked on Arthur, the unspoken history between them charging the room with tension. Arthur's response was deliberate, calm, and final. I stand for the plan we've presented. If the board chooses otherwise, I will resign and take with me the clients and partners necessary to ensure continuity under a strategy that preserves human capital. I will not compromise ethics for expedience. The air in the room vanished. The legal director's pen stopped mid-air, hovering over a contract that suddenly felt obsolete. The chairman looked from the predatory stillness of Elijah to the ironclad conviction in Arthur's eyes. For the first time, the board wasn't looking at a spreadsheet. They were looking at a coup. The silence that followed was profound. Every member of the board processed the statement, the risk, the defiance. Jules's eyes never left Arthur, seeing the man behind the CEO mask, resolute, strategic, human. Elijah's lips tightened, and the boardroom seemed to shrink under the gravity of unspoken battles, personal stakes, and calculated rebellion. Minutes stretched into tension-laden eternities. Finally, the chairman spoke. We must consider the evidence, the strategy, and the human element presented today. The proposal before us, Arthur and Jules' plan, demonstrates not only fiscal responsibility, but long-term sustainability. I propose we vote in favor of their recommendation. The room shifted, nod by nod. The board members aligned with the path of careful calculation, human insight, and strategic preservation. Elijah's expression hardened, rage barely contained beneath layers of decorum, his empire's succession challenged by the very son he trained for obedience and control. Arthur allowed himself the smallest exhale. Not relief, not triumph. Focus remained sharp. Yet for the first time, he allowed a fraction of what he felt to surface. Satisfaction not in victory, but in choosing integrity over compliance, human consideration over blind efficiency. Jules exhaled silently, her hand brushing over the edge of her documents. No outward celebration. Professionalism maintained. But the subtle acknowledgement of shared understanding passed between them. A tether of alliance solidified in the crucible of confrontation. Elijah remained seated, unyielding in posture, yet the lines of his face betrayed the sting of challenge and the inevitability of recalibration. The battle for control had not ended. Personal, familial, corporate. But today, the first victory for ethical governance, human insight, and the partnership between Arthur and Jules had been secured. As the boardroom cleared, Arthur and Jules lingered, reviewing details, recalibrating next steps, their minds sharp, synchronized, and now infused with mutual respect and cautious trust. The storm had passed, the strategy implemented, and yet the future remained precarious, dynamic, uncertain, and ripe for those prepared to act with intellect and integrity. The boardroom cleared, leaving only the silence of a shifted reality. Elijah remained in his seat, a monument to a fading era. Arthur didn't look back. He turned toward the window, then toward Jules, allowing a small, genuine smile to emerge. For the first time in a decade, the man behind the suit had found alignment. They exited the room together, leaving the ghost of the old system behind, not as subordinates, but as the architects of the new protocol.